Hey, church, welcome to our very first behind the scenes from Sunday. We're looking forward to doing something a little bit different today. And today we have Russell, and he's going to be talking about the sermon from Sunday. And we're going to be diving into a few different things from that stood out to him, a few different things that were highlights, and some things that he really wants us to walk away with as a community. So thank you for joining us, Russell, this morning. Good
That's
to
all
have
right.
you. Awesome. So this morning, we want to talk about your sermon from Sunday, which was a pretty incredible sermon and some really awesome things coming out of it. So I just really want to know, what were some of the best insights you had when preparing during the week?
Yeah, I had quite a few. One of the things that really stood out to me was the way that God introduced himself to Abraham,
Yeah.
the way he invited him to go on a journey. He didn't lay out a whole bunch of rules for him. He just said, "Are you going to trust me? Are you going to follow my lead?" And yeah, it's really interesting because as I did some research, there are stories in the rabbinical writings of the early centuries, and even from the Quran itself, that talk about I don't know, stories or myths from Abraham's upbringing, and both the Quran and the early rabbinical documents, commentaries on Genesis,
Yep.
talk about the fact that Abraham's father owned an idol shop,
Oh,
and that Abraham would help. You'd either call him Terah, or there's another name for him in the uh, Quran as well. I can't remember, but in both those stories, Abraham grew up helping his father in the idol shop, and yeah, obviously they both put quite a sort of a strong emphasis on Abraham, even as a young child, displaying great vigor for monotheism, which obviously, well, it's interesting, isn't it?
yeah, that's awesome.
But the interesting thing from Genesis itself is that God didn't turn up saying, "You will only worship me. It's me alone." This whole monotheistic theme.
Yep.
He just said, "Follow me," and the rest is rolled out slowly as Abraham begins to trust God, and God starts to open up to him and share more and more about him. And I think the thing that stood out to me is that Abraham is being is taken on a journey of which Yahweh is saying to him, "I'm not like what you think I'm like,"
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome.
and that whole thing is rolled out over his lifetime, which I found really interesting.
That's awesome. That reminds me of what you said on Sunday about the whole Abraham sacrificing
Thanks.
Isaac, and that was just fascinating to me. I was like, that's really interesting about how he's showing that he's not like the other gods. So after the sermon, was there things through the preparation that your thinking changed around? Were there things you thought beforehand that shifted and changed, or anything like that?
Yeah, just the idea of living in the promise. I hadn't picked that up before,
Mm.
and I'm really indebted to F.F. Bruce in his commentary on the way he explains it. I read this out on Sunday. Even when he received the promise of the inheritance, it was the promise that he received, not the visible possession of the land.
Mm.
But to Abraham, the promise of God was so substantial, or as substantial as its realization. He lived thereafter in the good of the promise. And that really struck me. And I thought, man, that's a tough one. But
Yeah.
there's something in that for us. There's something powerful in that and the whole idea that we might have an intergenerational promise over our life
Mm.
that we're not going to see the conclusion on or the fulfillment of, but we still need to carry that, live in it, and actually extract life from that very promise itself.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's what stood out to me from your sermon. That whole thing of promise, and that the promise sustaining you and feeding you, rather than actually having the visible expression
Mm,
of that promise fulfilled in your life. Maybe I was like, that was really cool. The fact that that's exactly what Abraham did,
that's
and all
right.
those people of
That's
faith
right.
did for generations. So then, so
Mm.
if you had one big takeaway, I know because you had the whole bunch of stuff you said in the sermon, what would one big takeaway you want people to sort of mull over, dwell over, this week, and to sort of to shift our thinking about how we
Sure,
do life
sure.
with God?
Yeah, it would be this. It would be that in the waiting, what are you doing?
Hmm.
In the waiting, you have these promises over your life. And I want to say too that I'm not just talking about personal prophetic words, but I'm talking about the promises that are in the Bible.
Yep.
In that sense, everybody has prophetic words over their lives.
Yeah.
Pick up your Bible and read about them. And there's so many there. But if you feel like you're in the waiting on a lot of them, well, God, He has things for you to do. He has, but not just activities for you to do, but there's a whole heart attitude of, so Father, what do you have for me right now? What can I do to sort of suck the very life out of these promises right now? And I see that in the life of Abraham. I mean, the guy got busy, and he was investing in his community. He was becoming a part, even though he saw himself as a foreigner. You know, remember I shared that they said of him, you know, Elohim Nasi. I think I'm not sure if that's correctly pronounced in the Hebrew or not.
I don't know any difference, so it sounds good.
But to call him such, you know, a prince of God like that, and for him to be in such high standing in a community where he was a foreigner, and he had the promise of God over his life for that whole region, and yet he did not sort of strut around telling people that that was the case, or you know, trying to sort of put God on show or anything like that. Yep. He humbled himself. He became a part of the community. He sowed into their lives. He loved them. It would appear that he loved them, and that he really gave himself for them. And even in the waiting, he changed many people's lives.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. Awesome. Well, thank you, Russell. That was awesome. 5-minute chat with Russell based on his Sunday sermon. So tune in next week when we do this again with next week's preacher. Awesome. Thanks, guys.